Alrighty. So I'm going to do the Bruins today, the Blues tomorrow. This would end the going forward series for 2019. And then we get into other series that we'll be looking at this summer. And the Bruins are an interesting one in that, they get to the Stanley Cup final. They lose that game 7 last night. I would love to give Bruins fans a rest, but we really don't have time. We have the awards coming up, we have the draft coming up, and then we have free agency. And at that point, this series, which already has 29 videos in it, becomes not really null and void, but I can't really do this after July 1st. And so I'm going to squash this in now. 49-24-9 was the record in the regular season, and of course they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, in and amongst that 49-24-9 record, I thought they were less impressive overall than last season in the regular season, but more prepared for the playoffs. And certainly the record seems to prove that. Losing in 7 in the Stanley Cup Finals, it stings. And getting back to that Stanley Cup Finals, it takes a lot. You go through these injuries, and then you have a shortened, much dramatically shortened summer than teams that missed the playoffs or teams that were out in the first round. So the amount of energy you're able to get back for October, it's tricky. Now, with cap space, they have 14 million. They don't really have a cap crunch, and I don't think they're going to this season or next season. But we'll get into that. Danton Heinen has arbitration rights as a restricted free agent. What that means is that if he and the Bruins can't come to an agreement on their contract, they then go to an arbiter who says, all right, here's what I think he's worth. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I don't think Heinen's going to want a tremendous raise, and I don't think Boston's going to lowball him either. McAvoy and Carlo, of course, are the big name restricted free agents. And they both deserve a raise that will eat into that $14 million in cap space and may very well destroy it. That cap space will disappear quickly. They're unrestricted free agents. Noel Acciari, who I think is going to want to come back, and I think that'll be a mutual thing. Marcus Johansson, I appreciated him as a hired gun for the playoffs, but I think that's all it was. I think he moves on. It's a shame because he looked good in the Bruins jersey too, but I think he probably moves on. He's proven himself as a top 6 forward in big games, and he's probably going to cash in from that. And Kampfer, who was a number 7 defenseman, stepped in here and there, kind of a number 8 at points too. He played well enough when he was in the lineup, but I think they move on from him as well. So really, it's a McAvoy-Carlo thing now. Next summer, things could get a little bit dicier, and I mean a little bit, not a lot. I don't think Boston needs to change a whole lot. I was talking about, perhaps maybe Krug, but I don't think they're going to have to worry about losing Krug at all. I think he's going to stay a Bruin. I would not be surprised to see Don Sweeney sign Krug to an extension before we hit the regular season this year. That wouldn't surprise me. They have the number 30 draft pick because they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals. They do not have a second or fourth round draft pick. And prospects are an issue with the Boston Bruins, and this is kind of a thing that happens when your team's pretty good. It also happens when you have 3 draft picks in a row in 2015 and you hit one of them. And that's been the case so far. I do not have Zach Senyshyn on the board because in his first 2 pro seasons, he hasn't made me feel any better about that draft pick, and I don't see him as a National Hockey League regular. Urho Vaakanainen, I should say. Sorry, Vaakanainen. Easy for me to say, right? Urho Vaakanainen. I like him. Good defenseman. I don't know that he steps into a top 6 role soon, as in next season, but I think he will become a top 6 defenseman for the Bruins. I think there's a little bit of everything with that kid's game, and we're going to need them just in case we do have to jettison players as soon as next season. Jacob Forsbacka-Karlsson had some bad runs and some bad luck with injuries. I still like JFK. I think he's a good player, and I still think he's got a good chance. Anders Bjork, I know there are Bruins fans that love Bjork. I'm not a big fan. Personally, I think he's speedy. He's got some of the skills. I feel the same way about him in Boston as I do about Goldobin in Vancouver. It's there. Yeah, there's games where he looks pretty good, but in general, I think there are better options. Jakobs Borrell, of course, a physical defenseman, 6 foot tall. Vakanainen, 6 foot tall as well. The St. Louis Blues won the cup with defensemen a minimum of 6 feet tall. Maybe that's where Boston's future lies as well as some tall guys, not just Chara and everybody else. Trent Frederick is the one that I'm mildly excited about, but here's the problem. Of these 5 prospects, and I like them, and I limited it to 5, there isn't really that next guy. I don't get the feeling with the Boston Bruins that there is that next big superstar player in their prospect pool. And they need it. And my other problem with the Bruins, and I know there are Bruins fans that don't like me saying it, but I don't think there's a goaltender in their system who can replace Rask when he's ready to move on, or even back him up right now. I agreed with moving on from Malcolm Subban. Halak was a solid backup this year, but age is becoming a problem. Because right now in the 30-plus club, and we're in a league that keeps getting younger and younger and younger, and eventually it bites teams that are too old for too long. I think that's part of what happened with Pittsburgh. There were other things that happened with Pittsburgh too. Krejci's 33 and he makes $7.25 million. If you want to look for the player that I think the Boston Bruins have likely tried trading before, and the guy who may very well help them free up a bunch of cap space to really change things around, I think this time next year, Krejci's the guy. There were attempts to move Krejci, I believe not this season, but last season, and I don't think anybody was touching that $7.25 million price tag, but that is a lot of money for what Krejci provides right now. Bergeron, 33 years of age, no complaints with Bergeron. Marchand, 31 years of age, no complaints with him. And he only makes $6.13 million a year for a guy who scored 100 points. That's not bad. David Backes, 35 years of age, $6 million for 2 more years. And that one stings. Backes, very likely to be bought out. It doesn't provide you as much cap relief as you would get from other buyouts. But Backes was a healthy scratch for much of the finals against St. Louis. I would say that points to an exit out of Boston. Kevin Miller, 31 years of age. Zdeno Chara, 42. He is signed for next year. I would think that's going to be his last season. Tuukka Rask is 32 years of age, and Halak is 34. So their goalies combined for 66 years of age. Halak had a solid season. Rask had, I think, the best year he's ever had. I think he had the best playoffs he's ever had. And yet, 32 years of age, there doesn't seem to be a guy in their system that can replace him. So if we're looking at a team that might want to draft a goaltender in the first round, it might be Boston. I'm just throwing that out there. And yet the last time they did that, it was Malcolm Subban. And it didn't work out. He ends up in Vegas. He may very well be available from Vegas again if Boston wants to look at Subban at some point again. But I digress. Now up next year, if you're looking at next year's free agents, Charlie Coyle, who was fantastic for Boston, makes $3.2 million. He's up next summer. Wagner, Nordstrom, good bottom 6 guys there. Krug is the big one. He makes $5.25 million right now. You have to think he's going to get a raise. I would think in the $6 to $7 million area, but I don't think you need to move on from him. It's really going to depend on how much McAvoy and Carlo gets before Boston really has to think about moving on. And since the cap moves up every single year, right? And we may be a year out from a new collective bargaining agreement, which may change everything. Could very well. Kevin Miller, Zdeno Chara. Chara, of course, that's a $2.7 million cap hit that comes off next summer. Miller, it's over $2 million for him as well. Halak, it's $2.75 million. So like I've been saying, the money's going to be there to sign Krug. It's just a matter of being able to figure everything else out around the team. And then restricted free agents next summer, Jake DeBrusk. He'll get a raise. I don't think he's going to get as much as people might speculate right now. I like DeBrusk, but I think he's second line at best. I don't see him as a first line winger. Kuhlman, who is much fun as he was to watch this year, not going to get a huge raise next summer in all likelihood. Grzelcyk, who is kind of sort of fantastic, but I'd like to see that depth in the Boston blue line retained. And Connor Clifton, who proved that Boston can bring in these no-name players, and they perform pretty darn well in a Boston jersey. There are some decisions to be made this offseason. I think next offseason is where things are going to be really interesting for Boston. The fact that there are so many players on this team that are 30 years of age or older, that does start to become a conversation because now next year in the playoffs, Krejci should be 34, Bergeron 34, Backus would be 36, Chara 43, Halak 35, Rask 33. It starts to add up. So it's going to be an interesting summer. I don't envy Don Sweeney's job in taking a team that was one game away from the Stanley Cup and trying to get them that extra game. Just make them that team that wins the Stanley Cup. Easy, right? It's not. Teams that lose the Stanley Cup, winning it the year after. I know Pittsburgh did it. Of course, they were a very young team, up and coming. It just doesn't happen. The team that loses the Stanley Cup final doesn't very often win the Stanley Cup the year after. I could certainly do a video on that, but it's a rarity. So we'll see how things turn out for Boston this summer. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Do they end up trying to make a splash this summer? I don't think so. I don't think there's any really big name free agents going in because I think it's already questionable whether or not they'd be able to sign Johansson if they wanted to keep him. So being able to free up enough cap space, even with a buyout of Backus, it's tricky. And I really like it when a general manager during the summer doesn't spend to the cap. That he leaves himself $4-5 million in space so that during the season he can take a guy in as a rental if he needs to, and he still has room to bring people in and to re-sign guys for the following season. I don't like it when you play with no cap space. But let me know your thoughts about that in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And for people wondering about the Blues video would be tomorrow because they won the Stanley Cup. So this is your going forward video for the Boston Bruins. And we'll see what they do this summer. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.